This is Beehive Banter in a week of bureaucratic bungles, lockdown liabilities, deflection, denial and lack of delivery. That's just from my builder. Meanwhile, here in Parliament, same thing. Joining me to dissect this litany of lack of liability once again is Director at Franks Ogilvy, NBR columnist and political analyst Bridget Morton. Thank you for coming in. Well, after an OIA request, it's now become clear that when Northland went into lockdown due to what we all believed or told was a sex worker sneaking through a cordon, that was in fact not the case at all. It was even hinted at one point by the then Minister Hipkins that they were in fact mistakenly given travel documents, but apparently left open to interpretation, perhaps that they had obtained them by deception. Well, now we've got one apology at the time, of course, Winston Peters to mongrel mob's Harry Tam, after he claimed he'd taken these sex workers to Northland. And this may be even worse. It was known now, or we know this, 3 days before the lockdown, that human error was to blame. Now, one of those women at the centre of those accusations wants an exceptional apology. Exceptional apology. Hipkins, though, saying nothing new here, and he doesn't want to get into all the ins and outs of the situation. Right, firstly, Bridget, does she and other women involved deserve a very bigly apology? And secondly, does this add fuel to the fire for cause of that inquiry into the whole COVID response?
I think there's no doubt actually there should be an apology. The government wields a lot of power and a lot of power to say things from what they claimed was the podium of truth at that time. So if you're wielding that much power against an individual, I do think there should be an apology for that. I'm not sure quite what an exceptional apology is or quite what they're looking for there, but I do think there should be acknowledgement that they did, disparage their character by the sort of intonations that they made. In terms of an inquiry, I think we've now got a bit of a pattern of things that went wrong. We don't expect, them to be completely mistake-free, particularly when they're working under, exceptional circumstances. But shouldn't we be prepared for the next time around to not have these same administrative mistakes happening?
Yeah, I guess it's like if you hold an event, you always have a meeting afterwards to figure out what went well and what didn't.
Yeah, and I think we're all now in the cycle that we are not naive enough to believe that this couldn't happen again. We kind of hoped after the first lockdown that was done and dusted. Now I think we have to be prepared that this could be something we could go through again. Why not learn from it?
Oh, goody. Officials have apologised. Why won't anyone else?
Politics,
yeah.
Embarrassment, not wanting to say you're wrong.
Well, what do you make then of the PM basically passing the buck to Hipkins? Because she was asked directly by media and she took the minister.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right, because you can see from that OIA that the minister perhaps actually had the knowledge earlier on. A little bit like the journalist who was in Afghanistan, that he actually had different information to what he said publicly. We've had some, interesting what happened around the KFC worker who was not getting information about whether or not they needed to go to work and the PM sort of standard. There's enough around there that you can see that the minister and his office perhaps needed to be communicating information better. And I don't know whether actually possibly she's also a bit frustrated that this accuracy was not put out earlier.
Yeah, have you noticed though more and more from her? I sort of go, if she doesn't want to talk about something, it's like talk to the minister, or it's just, no.
Well, I mean, you can see that from a politics angle. Jacinda Ardern, whilst her popularity has gone down considerably, she's still Labor's biggest asset. So all of these things that are going wrong with the government, it's in their interest to keep that as much as possible away from her. From an accountability point of view, though, she is the Prime Minister, so she does need to be accountable for her ministers and for her Cabinet's decisions.
You can only deflect so much before it looks like you're deflecting.
Yeah, and I think we're getting a bit of that at the moment. How many memes have we seen about her refuting the question?
Yeah, it's funny though. What do you make of also the far north Mayor John Carter? He said, and I'm going to get this right, typical of the invisible, arrogant Wellington bureaucracy.
Look, I'm not going to probably go as far as he has, but there's no doubt that one of the things that we can learn from this is actually people on the ground understand the practical circumstances. And we know that this cost them possibly 23 million up north because of that 11-day lockdown. Shouldn't, there be some learnings to be had there? This arrogance is also about not being willing to actually look back at some of your mistakes.
Of course, John Key was a master at this, wasn't he? He would always sort of, and it was a first for us really, when a PM came out and admitted mistakes, he said, I got it wrong.
Yeah.
And
deal with it fast.
What?
Yeah, that's accountability. That's what you should be doing.
Yeah. All right. Let's now travel a little further south now to the tourist mecca of Rotorua. Would you want to live there, Bridget?
So there is some beautiful lakes and some beautiful bush around, but there's no doubt that the CBD and the sort of city centre is not a great place to be right now. I think, COVID and the COVID restrictions have sort of decimated the heart of that city a bit, and obviously this emergency housing situation has made that strip of, tourist mecca not quite so attractive.
Very political way you avoided that question. The PM, our focus is on safely housing people. Now, she talks of assurances the minister got, saying there was no issue. Now they're going to look at the complaints process. Right, well, firstly, complaints process, what's that?
Yeah, clearly there's some action that needs to be taken here. It was more than sort of 2 years ago when Nicola Willis raised questions about emergency housing in Wellington and the infiltration of gangs. And the ministers, they really pushed back like this was some sort of racist argument. But actually, what we're seeing is a continuation and a repetition of that throughout emergency housing throughout the country. A complaints process is not going to, fix getting in there and actually helping a whole lot of families that feel very vulnerable and very scared because there's not the support services around that emergency housing or the pathway to get them out of it that needs to be.
Housing poverty, people living in cars, public housing waiting lists. Is there any other word apart from failure that you can use to describe what the government said they would do and where things are now?
I think I'd say utter failure. This is pretty extraordinary. I think the number is something like 4 times the number of people in their cars than when Jacinda Ardern came to the office of Prime Minister. There's
public housing waiting lists
is 10 times. The numbers are just so extraordinary that they're almost unbelievable. You've got to wonder, they haven't just allowed a situation to continue. They've got it demonstrably worse with no pathway out.
No one's saying it wouldn't have gone this way under another government, but it's just so bad. It's like, what do you do?
And that wasn't addressed earlier as well. It's not like we suddenly went from here to there.
Yeah.
They've done it, they've failed to interject at any point.
Well, where's the line, though, between housing people who need it and what we're seeing in Rotorua?
Well, I think there is very hard to determine what is actual need and who gets on a list at what priority. There's clearly people in Rotorua that don't need to be there. There probably needs to be better systems around that. And also, I think a bit of stronger, this government came in with a policy of not ejecting tenants out of public housing for bad behaviour. I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
When the pressure comes back from the government saying, well, and they do this very well, would you rather we didn't look after the homeless? It's a no-win situation because you can't win anyway by answering that question. The government can, though, by asking it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the moment, we've got a Minister for Homelessness, Marama Davidson, who has done, I think, zilch on homelessness. There's nothing demonstratively that she has done. Yeah, and she talks about, what our chocolate is wrapped in. That's the big issue that she was on the front page for the last fortnight when you've got all these people living in cars. That, frankly, is not good enough from a Cabinet Minister.
The PM, motels only intended to be a transition. In fact, also hotels in some parts of Auckland where you wouldn't go walking at night, and I have, and I can certainly tell you, I didn't feel safe walking into one. A friend of mine was running it. I didn't feel safe at all, particularly at the entranceway. A, dangerous cauldrons of mayhem and misery, and B, over $1 billion so far spent and counting. How long can they continue the spin and the spend?
Well, it seems that they've been doing it to date. It looks like they've got no plan to stop, so until basically they're no longer in government.
Well, what could the Nats or anyone do?
Well, I think it is a big, to turn that ship around is going to be quite massive. The key things are going to be about changing, I think, some of those settings about who has got access to housing and whether or not the people, particularly families who are in those hotels that even you didn't feel safe in, then how can those families be addressed and maybe prioritised out of those hotels?
Well, we're running out of time, but I want to go to this briefly. The Youth Crime Initiative, better pathways, more wraparound support for young offenders to get them education, training or work, and you have to applaud the intent. But is it going to help dairy owners who keep getting ram-raided?
Look, I definitely agree with you. The intent looks good, but there also looks to be a lot of funds with a lot of $1 million price tags attached to them. It's not really clear exactly how they'll make a difference on the ground. And I do think that the government can't continue to just pretend that they can get away with doing these type of initiatives without also doing some stronger initiatives against some of those youth criminals. Because whilst they might be young, they are doing very dangerous and very harmful activities.
Well, of course, active stolen what some say is national thunder by suggesting that these little dares have ankle bracelets, even as young as the age of 11.
Yeah, I think that one might be a little bit questioned, but when you say they've stolen national thunder, there's no doubt that the government can see that the large majority of New Zealanders are very concerned about seeing things like daylight ram raids on Queen Street executed by some of our youth.
All right, Net's saying balance is wrong. What's right?
I don't think we've got time for that.
So we're wrong to say no, we haven't. All right. Look, that is BI batted for another week. Again, Bridget, thanks for coming in. But a quick question, though. Does right now have the feel of an election year? Or is all of this that we've been seeing the last couple of weeks, is it just the norm?
I definitely think
I just don't remember seeing it like this.
it is definitely heading into an election type season, but I don't think I've seen enough kissing baby photos yet for it truly to be that sort of snapshotty headline. Yeah, that's your signal that, that's where we've got to.
There you go. Food for thought. Speaking of which, snack time. All right. See you next time. And as usual, we appreciate you taking the time to watch or listen.